Okay, brethren, last week we were looking at the bowls of wrath in the book of Revelation. That would be chapter 16, by and large. And the bowls of wrath bring an end to God's wrath. God's wrath on the world starts with the trumpets, the 7 trumpets. The first trumpet is fire, burning, and so on. Then we go through all 7 trumpets. At the end of those, when the 7th trumpet is opened, probably about a year after they begin, we get the 7 bowls of wrath, which complete or finish God's wrath upon the earth, upon the wicked. At the end of the 7 bowls, God has defeated all of his enemies. The beast, the false prophet, the dragon have all been defeated. There's the battle at Armageddon, bowl number 6, when all the armies are destroyed. There's bowl number 7, which is the greatest earthquake of all time. And then these hailstones at about 100 pounds apiece raining down. That's a huge demolition job that pretty much flattens the face of the earth. At the end of that, there is not much left, really. The beast, all his armies are destroyed. Every building, I would imagine, pretty much that exists on the earth will be crushed and fragmented by these massive hailstones that come raining down, right? And that's in chapter 16. Everything is pretty much over. And yet, as we start chapter 17, an angel says to John, "Let me show you the judgment of the great harlot." Well, clearly, the great harlot was judged and destroyed in the story flow. Somewhere between the first trumpet and the 7th bowl, the harlot, its leaders, the beast, everything was destroyed. So therefore, there's nothing left as we start chapter 17. As part of the story flow, it's all over. So what we know, therefore, is that chapter 17 and 18 are, in fact, inset chapters. Now, we've met those before, right? Inset chapters are there to give you a broader perspective, some additional detail that wasn't covered particularly well previously. So when we start looking at chapter 17, we are looking at the judgment of the great harlot and also somewhat the beast, right? But that's already taken place. That's in the story flow. After the 7th bowl, there's not much left. There's certainly no harlot and beast left, right? They're finished by then. So chapter 17, chapter 18, definitely inset chapters. Now last week we started in chapter 17, read verses 1 through 6, which actually we'll be reading again shortly. But before we go there, let's just remind ourselves of what we saw last week. We saw a harlot. I think the King James might say a great whore, right, who is riding or sitting on a scarlet beast. She is said to be sitting on many waters, right? She's said to be located in the wilderness, or the Greek implies a desert place, right? So there are a number of symbols we saw there in the first part of Revelation 17. Like I said last week, typically in the book of Revelation, all symbols are explained very often right there and then. And if not there and then, same chapter of the part of the book of Revelation, you'll find the symbols clearly explained, say in the Old Testament, like, for example, the book of Daniel, for instance. And if there's no explanation of what you think is a symbol, then it's probably not a symbol. It's probably to be taken, literally. And so last week we saw that the scarlet beast on which the harlot sits is the beast of Revelation 13, right? 7 heads, 10 horns, blasphemy all over it. You may recollect that. So that tells us from previous studies that we're looking at a collection of 10 nations. I'm suggesting, me and my friend, Islamic nations led by a great Islamic leader, right? Certainly what many Bible prophecy scholars refer to as the Antichrist. So there's 2 beasts in the book of Revelation 13. The first beast is a great political military leader. There are 10 horns or 10 nations in a sort of coalition or an alliance, right? The Muslim people, those who are devout, which I guess is a fair number of them, are waiting for their end-time political, military, religious leader. They refer to that person as their Mahdi, right? So that's the scarlet beast of Revelation 13 on which this harlot is riding. It says she sits on many waters. Well, that's a symbol, what of? Well, the chapter tells us the waters are many tribes, peoples, tongues, and nations. Therefore, the harlot has international reach. It says that the harlot is, well, the term the Great Harlot itself is a symbol, right? The Great Harlot, it's not actually a woman, right? It's a symbol. But of what? Well, you can speculate all you want, but you don't need to, because it tells us in verse 18 that the Great Harlot is the great city, which rules and reigns over the kings of the earth. Again, international, but the Great Harlot is a great city. Now, it tells us that the great city and the beast are to be found in the wilderness or in the desert, right? Now, that's not explained. Therefore, I take that to be literal. You'll find the great city that we're talking about here, the harlot, the great city, in a desert location. So what we're looking for, I think we came to a conclusion last week, is a great city with international influence and power, sitting on or guiding or directing an Islamic empire of 10 Islamic nations, and you'll find her in a desert location, right? And that's not uncommon, like I said last week, to find that God uses the term harlot to picture a city, right? Because last week we turned to Isaiah 1, which we're not turning to today, otherwise we won't make any progress. But in Isaiah 1 last week, you might recollect, hopefully you recollect, that God refers to the faithful city in which he used to find justice and righteousness, talking of Jerusalem, his city, and he says she's a harlot. So Jerusalem is described by God as a harlot, right? In Nahum chapter 3, you'll find that Nineveh, the capital city of Assyria, is described as a harlot, in fact, as a seductive harlot, a harlot that influences and attracts and lures other nations to deal with her. The seductive harlot is a city, right? And then you've got Tyre, Tyre. In Isaiah 23, it refers to Tyre, the coastal city in Palestine, as a harlot, right? So it's not at all uncommon. So Revelation 17:18 tells us that the great harlot is a great city. I'm taking that to be literal. It's a city. Harlot is a common term for a city. So I'm not looking for the Roman Catholic Church, right, for example, or any other church for that matter, but the one I'm more familiar with is identifying the harlot as a Roman Catholic Church. Don't think so. I'm going to go with Revelation 17:18 that says it's a great city. And it's not that the harlot is a symbol of a city, which is a symbol of something else, right? You don't have a sequence of symbols coming to something 18 down the road. The harlot is a symbol of a great city. A great city is the answer. But which city? I think that's as far as we got last week. Which city could it be? Some people say New York, because New York is a powerful international city. Wall Street is there. Banking, finance, and so on, influences and tentacles all around the earth. Is New York in a desert? I think it fails there, doesn't it? Plus, fails for lots of other reasons. That's one of them. How about Rome? Rome is a key player in many people's prophetic understanding for reasons you're all familiar with. But Rome in a desert? Nope. I've been to Rome many times, one of my favorite cities. It's not in a desert, let me assure you, right? What about the original Babylon? Some people say, well, we're talking about Babylon, mystery Babylon. It could be the original Babylon. Well, it's still there, sort of, in Iraq, but it's ruins. It's archaeological ruins. There's nothing there. Well, not much anyway. I think Saddam Hussein tried to rebuild bits of it. So there's a few bits, like some museums, and I think he stamped his name on some bricks, Saddam Hussein, the mighty king, whatever. But there's nothing there, right? It's not a living city. So if it's not those places, where might it be? And this is where my friend Nebuchadnezzar, the rubber chicken, sort of comes in, because I'm going to suggest that what fits all the context, seems to me, and other people for that matter, is that the city of Mecca, right? The great city of Mecca in Saudi Arabia, right? Now I'm going to cover bits of Mecca off and on through this presentation, but just a few brief facts as we start about Mecca, and to sort of lay the groundwork of why I think it's actually quite a good fit for the scriptures, which is what we're sort of looking for. But yeah, okay, it's not can't be too dogmatic, even though I think I'm right. But Mecca, right? What do we know about Mecca? It's the holiest city on earth to a quarter of the world's population. 1.8 billion Muslims, which is roughly 25% of people on the earth. They look to Mecca as the holiest city on earth. So it already has a special identity, a special reputation, a special place in people's minds, the city of Mecca. It's the birthplace, allegedly at least, of Mohammed. And therefore it's the birthplace of the religion of Islam, which is followed by 1/4 of the people on the earth, right? That derives from Mecca. Muslims, if they're devout Muslims, of course Muslims vary a bit like Christians vary a bit. There are devout, enthusiastic, and there are lazy and shiftless and all the rest of it, right? People who've left Islam and so on. So it's quite a wide range, but basically all the good Muslims pray pointing towards Mecca 5 times a day. That's one of the duties of a good Muslim. So they actually have, you can do it your smartphone. You can get an app that will actually point an arrow towards Mecca. So wherever you might be in the USA or Austria or Scotland or wherever, right, Wales, I think even, right, get your app out and that's it over there. Yeah. And if you go into any mosques, there's usually a niche in the wall somewhere with a couple of signs on it, that way, right? So they have to pray towards Mecca, right, 5 times a day. So it's never far from your mind as a Muslim. Equally, if you're a good Muslim, you need to attempt to make a pilgrimage to Mecca at least once in your life. I mean, ideally more than that, but if you've got the money and the health, you need to make that journey to Mecca, the holiest city, at least once in your life, at the time of the Hajj, H-A-J-J, the Hajj. That's a pilgrimage where millions of Muslims head towards Mecca for this few days event. A bit like people used to head towards, say, Jerusalem for the Feast of Tabernacles. All right, people like millions head towards Mecca to keep the Hajj. And if you're in good health and you got the money, the readies, and you don't do a journey to Mecca, then you won't be in paradise. It's that important, right? Then Mecca is the location of the Kaaba. We'll have some photographs later, but that's the cube, the big, black cube in the center of the square where Muslims all descend to worship. The Kaaba is the house of God, the house of Allah, of course, in their case. There's a black stone in the corner of it, which different stories, but Abraham brought it, or Angel Gabriel gave it to him, or whatever, different stories there, right? And Mecca, as the center of Islam, has huge impact over much of the earth, and also for other reasons, right? So that's a bit of background to where we were last week. So let's pick up the story again. We'll start in Revelation 17 and reread verses 1 through 6, then bring a few other bits and pieces of the story out. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls, the bowls of wrath, came and talked with me, saying to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment, the punishment of the great harlot, who sits on many waters," peoples, tribes, tongues, nations, "with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication." So she has worldwide influence. And as we said earlier, the angel's going to show the judgment, but the judgment already has taken place in the story flow. Right? Nothing survived the 6th and 7th bowls. This is clearly inset, giving you background information. Verse 3, "So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness," Greek eremos, meaning typically a desert or a lonely place. "And I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns." And we see that back in Revelation 13. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, quite a wealthy individual, having in her hand a golden cup, or like a chalice, full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great. That's who she is, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. John was clearly astonished. Okay, so we've already covered some of the symbols here, but other bits to bring out. Just mentioned she's very wealthy. It talks about purple and scarlet and gold and precious stones. So this city, which is what it is a very wealthy city, right? And moving on, it says her name on her forehead, verse 5, is Mystery, Babylon the Great. So that suggests it's not the original Babylon, which of course is just ruins today. It's a mystery, Babylon the Great. It has to be revealed who this Babylon is, and it is revealed, right? So it's not the original, it's the mystery, Babylon the Great. It tells us in verse just before that, or just after that she's the mother of harlots and abominations, right? Now, I think in the past we've perhaps seen mother of as like the one who gives birth to or generates, or the origin of, but I think we learned a thing or two from Saddam Hussein back in the 1990s, whatever, when Mr. Hussein referred to the battle that would take place against the US and his allies as they sought to invade Iraq and topple Mr. Hussein. He said it's going to be the mother of all battles, right? Doesn't mean it's the origin of all battles on the earth. It's the mother of all battles. And that appears to be a Middle East idiom. Mother of meaning the greatest, the biggest, the worst, the mother of. Right? You see, I've seen it in newspapers now quite a few times, the mother of, right? And so here it's just telling us that this great city is the worst of all harlots, right? This great harlot is way above. This great city is way above all others, right? And it tells us here also that verse 6, this city, the woman, the city, is responsible for the blood of saints and the blood of the martyrs of Jesus, right? And we see that in the sense of, particularly in the end times, if you think of the fifth seal, right, when it says those who were martyred, who were killed for the word of God and for their testimony. So in the end times, this harlot, this city with her influence, will be responsible for the bloodshed of many saints, many martyrs, particularly in the end time, but even over the centuries. Islam, if that's who we're talking about, has a lot of blood on her hands. You know, Islam has virtually always been murderous towards Christians and other religions as well, but we're looking at the Christian side of things, right? If you think of history, for the first few centuries, North Africa was largely Christian or nominally Christian. The Middle East, Asia Minor, Turkey, through Greece and so on, was nominally Christian. People that said they believed in God the Father, people that believed that Jesus was the Son of God, that he was crucified and died and rose again and ascended to heaven. Those people, right? Christians in a sort of general sense. So most of North Africa and the Middle East was Christian. Not any longer. They're all wiped out by the Muslims, right? And it wasn't always peaceful conversion. Yeah, I'm thinking about it. I think I'll swap and become a Muslim. That's a good idea because I'm persuaded by their doctrinal purity. Usually it was like a sword just inside of your neck. And if you want to leave Jesus Christ and join Allah and Muhammad, we'll take the sword away. But if you stand firm to God the Father and Jesus Christ, this sword will take your head off. Consequence, a few centuries later, there's hardly any Christians left in that part of the world. Okay, now I mentioned earlier that this is a great harlot who sits on a scarlet beast, quite a colourful picture. And a few artists here and there have always sought to try and, draw something that would catch our eyes. So I think we have a slide coming up. Just so there you can see a couple of pictures there of a woman, a harlot. Picture on the top left. She's riding this 7-headed and 10-horned beast, presumably, at least to an extent, guiding it and directing it, but not perhaps fully, completely in charge always, because the bottom right picture, if you can see it, shows the beast turning on the harlot and about to devour her. Right? No love lost, this is the marriage of convenience, and after a short time it ends rather brutally as the beast, scarlet beast, turns on the woman, and we come to that a little bit later. Right, over the centuries, people have tried to calculate just how brutal and bloodthirsty, murderous Islam has been. There's no easy way, of course, to check back it over all the centuries, but one reasonable estimate, I guess, is that Islam has brought about the death of 270 million people in its 1400 years of existence. It came around about 600-ish AD. So in those 1400 years, it's killed about 250 million people. And that's back in the days when there weren't as many people around. That's quite a lot of people, right? And it's going to kill many more in the future. That's what Scripture reveals to us. Okay, so let's carry on. Let's read verses 7 through 10. But the angel said to me, "Why did you marvel? Why are you astonished? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns." And be alert here, there's two pictures, right? 2 symbols. There's a woman and a beast, a harlot and a beast. The language is fine if you pay attention, but just a slight risk occasionally of wandering off and thinking you're reading about the beast and actually reading about the harlot and vice versa. So to be just a wee bit, focused. Verse 8, the beast, right? The 10 nations of Islamic countries who are united together under the leadership of the Mahdi or the Antichrist. That's the beast, okay? The beast that you saw was and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition. So I see a demonic influence there. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was and is not, and yet is. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. I don't like that translation much. It doesn't follow the Greek. It does follow the King James, and I'm reading the New King James, but I think most translations and the Greek will say here, the 7 heads are 7 mountains on which woman sits, and they are also 7 kings. So the mountains are kings. The 7 mountains are, it says they are in most translations, not there are. Bit odd. So verse 10, they are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. This is the sort of language that gives most people a migraine when they're trying to figure out what on earth Scripture is talking about, right? So first of all, the angel's describing the beast. And he says the 7 heads of the beast, 7 heads, 10 horns, the 7 heads are 7 mountains, and they are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is yet to come. Now, I think we're all fairly familiar with the symbol that a mountain represents a kingdom, right? Or a king. Of course, a king represents his kingdom. You've got King Nebuchadnezzar, right? The king who represents the gold empire at the top of the statue, right? Babylon and so on. So here we have 7 kingdoms, right? 7 heads, 7 kings, 7 kingdoms, right? It says 5 have fallen, 1 is, and 1 has yet to come, right? And well, that's telling us that in John's day, when he received the prophecy and the explanation, 5 of these kingdoms had gone. They were past tense. They had fallen. These 5 kingdoms were no more. One existed in John's day, which would, I think, quite clearly be the Roman Empire, the Roman kingdom, right? Because it's there when John's around. And one was yet to come sometime later down the road in the future, right? So we need to look at what those 7 kingdoms might represent. 7 heads, 7 kings, 7 kingdoms. Now, at this point, some people do, or rather, jump the tracks, it seems a little bit, because they read 7 mountains. The 7 heads are 7 mountains, and then something peculiar happens, and it becomes 7 hills, right? And everybody knows the city on 7 hills is Rome, right? And then you get the Roman Catholic Church must be lurking around there somewhere. So that's sort of the direction they tend to go down. But we're talking here about the beast, not the city. The city is the harlot. This isn't talking about the harlot. We're talking about the beast with 7 heads, right? And the 7 heads are 7 mountains, not 7 hills. There's a different Greek word. Mountain is oros, O-R-O-S. Well, it's in Greek letters, of course, but that's the English letters. That's mountain. If you want a hill, that's a bunos, B-O-U-N-O-S, bunos, right? And if you want a city on 7 hills, which is not what it's talking about, right? Not talking about the city, it's not talking about the harlot, it's talking about the city here. If you want a city on 7 hills, you've got a choice. It could be Seattle, it could be San Francisco, it could be Jerusalem, it could be Rome, it could be Istanbul, right? It could be a lot of places, right? So you can't build anything on, well, it's a city on 7 hills, which must, of course, be Rome. That's what they call confirmation bias. People who already believe that it's Rome and the Roman Catholic Church, they read things like, 7, hills. Oh, that must be Rome. That's just confirming the bias you started with, right? So we're talking here about 7 mountains. And a mountain represents a kingdom, of which at this stage 5 have fallen. A city on 7 hills where 5 of the hills have disappeared. Is that what we're supposed to be looking for? No, they're not identified explicitly, right? It doesn't tell us what these 7 mountains, these 7 kingdoms are, right? But you can do a little bit of detective work, just a little bit, with obviously a little bit of speculation, which is almost certainly we're talking about those kingdoms which have opposed God's people over the centuries. The dragon, the devil will never be too far behind. So have God's people, Israel and so on, down through the centuries, millennia, been oppressed, attacked, sought to be wiped out time and time again by the devil through 7 kingdoms? The answer is actually yes. And this is there's a few guesses and a few bits of speculation out there. This is one that to me makes sense. So I'll present it and you can do what you want. Take it or leave it, as they say. You start with Egypt, number 1. So of the 7 mountains, the 7 kingdoms, of which 5 are fallen, number 1, Egypt. If you think, when did Israel start? When Jacob and his family went down to catch up with Joseph in Egypt because of the famine in the land, right? And there in Egypt, the family of Israel multiplied and grew and became ultimately probably millions strong. And of course, the Egyptians turned against them. They made them slaves. It was required that all the boy babies be tossed into the Nile, right? No doubt Satan there trying to make sure that the Messiah couldn't be born. If he was born, he'd be drowned. I guess that's Satan's hope, right? So Egypt, number 1, that oppressed and sought to destroy God's people. Number 2, Assyria, because you know the story. Northern tribes of Israel, the bulk of Israel, captured by the Assyrians and taken away into captivity, apparently never to return. Number 3, Babylon. All right, Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, right, came to Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, took all the Jews from the house of Judah to Babylon into captivity. Right. After that came Persia. Right. Now Persia blew hot and cold a wee bit, but you remember the story from Esther, right? Hopefully. And Haman the Agagite, the nasty guy, that tried to get all the Jews across the entire empire destroyed in one particular day. Remember? That's like a Holocaust being designed. Boo hiss to Haman the Agagite. right? That was the Persian days, trying to wipe out all of Judah. And he almost succeeded if Esther hadn't been in the palace, right? After that, we get Greece. So that would be number 5, right? So Greece ruled over much of the world, of course, including over Judah, Palestine, Israel, and so on. And in the days of Greece, things were bad at times. You had Antiochus Epiphanes, right? And he's quite well known. He's thought to be a sort of a foreshadow of the Antichrist because of the misery and destruction he caused. So that's Greece. So that's 5 which are fallen, right? Number 6 is Rome. That's the empire when John was around. Of course, Rome, you remember, destroyed the temple in 70 AD and killed roughly 1 million Jews at the temple. So time was difficult under the Roman Empire. And of course, Jesus would be familiar with that firsthand. Now, the Roman Empire actually ran for quite a long time. People often decide that when Rome fell, the Roman Empire fell. Nothing of the sort. You know, Rome was no longer the capital of the Roman Empire long before Rome fell. They'd moved the capital, far more pleasant place, Istanbul, or as it was called then, Constantinople, named after the Emperor Constantine, which is modern-day Turkey, Istanbul. Right, it's much more pleasant city, I've got to say, geographically. It's also one of my favourite cities, Istanbul, a lovely place. And the Roman Empire continued ruling from Istanbul, Constantinople, till 1453, right? At which point, so that's the one that is. Then there's one to come, it says, one yet to come. Number 7, I'm going to suggest, my friend and I, is Islam, because that's supplanted the Roman Empire and ran up till 1924. The Ottoman Empire, one of the world's most powerful empires across North Africa, Middle East, down into Arabia, up into to Asia Minor, Turkey, of course, that's where it was based, across Eastern Europe, right up to Vienna in Austria. Massive empire, century after century after century. And of course, being Muslim, if you're a Jew or a Christian, you were offered the opportunity to convert. And sometimes you were given the chance to be a second-class citizen. You had to pay a tax, the jizya. But you were forbidden to occupy certain high offices and so on and so forth. You had to pay this jizya, you're a second-class citizen, your word wasn't as good as a Muslim's word. And of course, in many cases, the alternative was just get your head taken off. So Islam, Ottoman Empire at least, ran until 1923, 1924, when, as we've said in the past, it suffered a deadly wound and came to an end. Okay, so that's the 7. 1 Egypt, 2 Assyria, 3 Babylon, 4 Persia, 5 Greece, 6 Rome, 7 suggesting Islam. The 7 heads, the 7 mountains, of which 5 were fallen in John's day, 1 is in John's day Rome, 1 was yet to come, which far off in John's future was Islam, or the Ottoman Empire, probably. Okay, let's read the next verse, verse 11 of chapter 17. The beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th, and is of the 7, and is going to perdition. He's going to be destroyed, which we know. And in fact, the 6th and 7th bowls of wrath were the final destruction of the beast. That's where the beast was captured and the false prophet, and they were then at some point thrown into the lake of fire, right? Going to perdition along with these armies. But verse 11, the beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th, and is of the 7. Slightly strange way of phrasing it, but I'm not an angel. But clearly this has been classed as like an 8th kingdom, right? But it's not a brand new, never seen before 8th kingdom. 7 heads, but there's going to be an 8th head. 7 mountains, it's going to be an 8th mountain, right? 7 kings, it's going to be an 8th king. But not brand spanking, never seen before new. It's one of the 7. So it says there, right? He's also the 8th and is of the 7. So of those 7 that I've just suggested, Egypt and Assyria and Babylon and all the rest of it, all the way down to Islam, one of those is returning to be the 8th head, the eighth mountain, the eighth kingdom, but he's of the seven. So which one would it be? Is Egypt coming back to be super powerful? Is it going to be Persia? It's coming back to be super powerful. Well, without making a song and dance about it, I'm pretty sure it's the seventh one. Islam, right? The Islamic Empire, very possibly or even probably the Ottoman Empire, which died and was killed and was mortally wounded at least in 1922, 23, 24. So just we're a centenary on from that, right? Is going to be healed. I've said that in the past quite a bit. Its mortal wound will be healed, and somehow, somewhere, the nation of Turkey or the Ottoman Empire will be restored to full power, right? So that's the one that's of the seven. I'm thinking it's number 7, having been mortally wounded, reappears as 8 of the 7. Okay, let's read verses 12 to 14. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom, so kingdom, right, as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. They are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. So 7 leaders, 7 kingdoms ally together with the beast leader. These will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called, chosen, and faithful. When does that happen? Well, pretty obvious, isn't it? That's the battle at Armageddon, right? The 10 nations in cahoots with the leader of the beast, they gather their armies to, it says there, verse 14, they'll make war with the Lamb. Well, when does that happen? Well, when the Lamb returns to make war. He's on his white horse, Revelation 19. He swoops down with his armies, right? He makes war and he destroys, right? All dead bodies everywhere, the birds coming to eat the carcasses. That's the battle at Armageddon, at Jerusalem, and that's where the battle is, right? So these 10 leaders and their kingdoms are alive and kicking at the battle at Armageddon, end time, right? And it says Jesus makes war against them, the end of verse 14. Those who are with Jesus are called, chosen, and faithful. That's clearly the saints. All right, it's not the angels. The angels aren't called, faithful and chosen. What was it called, chosen, and faithful? That's the saints. As we've said before, or at least I've suggested before, the saints are up in heaven for the last 12 months or so, and they come back with Jesus riding white horses themselves to battle. Those who are with Jesus are called, chosen, and faithful. Right? So everything seems to harmonize quite well. Here's Jesus at the 6th bowl there, the battle at Armageddon with his resurrected and changed saints. Right?
Can I have a donkey?
I don't think you can have a donkey, no.
I don't like horses.
I think you have to have a white horse. Verse 15 to 18. Then he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. Already covered that. Symbols, waters. The explanation is international peoples. The 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, not hate the beast, hate the harlot, hate the city. Right? Now, whether it's all along or whether it's sort of grown and developed over the short time they're around, but certainly the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. So clearly, like the picture you saw earlier, right? The 7-headed scarlet beast turns on the woman, the harlot, and destroys her, which is, of course, God's doing. He's using the beast as his tool. For God has put it into their hearts to fulfill his purpose, to be of one mind, and to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. Part of the destruction of the harlot, part of the judgment of the harlot. And the woman you saw, the harlot you saw, is that great city, which reigns over the kings of the earth. All right? So there hopefully isn't too much confusion about the fact it's a great city. The harlot is a great city. A great city. And the city is not a symbol of something. It's a great city. Just take it literally, right? And you could wonder quite why the beast and the 10 horns turn on the harlot. It's only speculation. You could say possibly they're offended, because if they're strict Muslims, then they won't like the fact that this city is notorious for its decadence, its obscene levels of luxury. Or it could simply be a question of, competition. The Antichrist, head of the beast, is based in Jerusalem, and over there is Mecca, boasting that it's the head of the Islamic peoples. Maybe it's like, not taking that line down. That's competition I'm not prepared to put up with, so let's destroy Mecca, right, and get rid of her. I'm the Antichrist. I'm God's representative on earth, not that city over in Saudi Arabia with all of its, obscenities. Okay, so that's chapter 17. Chapter 18 continues the story. I think somebody said somewhere that chapter 17 and 18 are the longest prophecy in the New Testament. So we're still continuing with the judgment of the harlot, but whereas we've been focusing a wee bit there on the beast, right? This swaps now to pretty much the harlot. Verse 18. After these things I saw another angel coming down. So read verses 1 through 10, then we'll try and unpack it. After these things I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird. So that's his future. Currently it's a very wealthy city, admired, almost worshipped by nearly 2 billion people, right? It's going to end up as a habitation of every foul and unclean bird and spirit. Interestingly, the word foul is the same as the word unclean, by the way. So at least as far as the angel is concerned here, this is an aside, right? Nothing to do with the prophecy, but as an aside, the angel in the end times is talking about unclean birds. Right? Did you say that? Every unclean and hated bird, every unclean bird, would be, ravens and vultures and things like that, still unclean. In the angel's eyes, in the end times, there are still unclean birds. And I assume if there are unclean birds, there are unclean animals. Rabbits, hares, badgers, pigs, snakes, things, right? So whereas a lot of people, churches, no, everything was made clean by Jesus, somewhere other than Mark, whatever it was, chapter 7 of Matthew 15. Jesus made all meats clean. Well, better tell the angel, because he still thinks that some birds are unclean birds, as by the by. Verse 3, for all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath or the passion of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. There are a couple of elements to this. There's wealth and prosperity almost unimaginable, produced if you have a relationship, an illicit relationship with this woman, this harlot. A harlot, obviously, by definition, has illicit relationships, not virgins, a harlot. And also you got there the wine of her fornication. Like if you drink too much wine, which way is up? You lose some of your common sense, right? You make stupid comments, you can't speak properly and all the rest of it, right? So there's talking here about the influence of her teachings, the influence of her seductions on the kings of the earth and their merchants. So kings, you could be presidents, prime ministers. We got a couple of comments a bit later about US presidents, right?
Sure not.
And also, of course, CEOs, big corporations, right? A lot of influence from Mecca or Saudi Arabia, which Mecca, in a sense, represents. Verse 4. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, lest you share, in her sins, and lest you receive of her plagues, for her sins have reached to heaven. And God has remembered her iniquities. God's singling out Babylon here, the whole 2 chapters, 2 inset chapters devoted to telling us more about Babylon, the great mystery, Babylon, the great city, right? Verse 6, render to her just as she rendered to you. Repay her double according to her works. In the cup which she has mixed, mix double for her. In the measure that she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, in the same measure give her torment and sorrow. I mean, God's got it in for her, this harlot, because of her dominant power over the earth in these latter days. In the measure, verse 7, in the measure that she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, in decadence, in the same measure give her torment and sorrow, for she says in her heart, I sit as a queen, and am no widow, and will not see sorrow. Well, pride comes before destruction. Therefore her plagues will come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she will be utterly burned with fire. For strong is the Lord who judges her. Lord God's using the beast to carry out much of that judgment. The kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her will weep and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, and saying, alas, that great city, Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. So here is the great city located in the desert, right? And it's the harlot, it's the great city. It tells us this, we've read it there, verse 10. Alas, that great city, Babylon, that mighty city. If you drop down and just look quickly at verses 16 and 18, verse 16, alas, that great city. Verse 18, they saw the smoke of burning, saying, what is like this great city? Right? So if your mind is locked in on this being the Catholic Church, it's not. Right? It's a great city located in the desert, a city which is infamous for its relations with kings and CEOs around the world, and notorious for its luxury and its super prosperity. And this chapter here chapter 18, deals in detail with the destruction, the judgment of this great city. Now we read here in verse 7, in the measure that she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, right? So she glorifies in her wealth, her opulence, her fame, the fact that so many billions around the world look to her, right? And she lives in luxury and decadence, right? She thinks herself, there, same verse I think, I sit as a queen. So this great city sees herself as a queen of the earth in her own mind, right? Not how God sees her. God says she'll be destroyed in 1 day, and a couple of places there it says you'll be destroyed in 1 hour. Now, if we take that literally, and no reason not to, then the plagues that strike down Mecca and probably Saudi Arabia, because Mecca is the key holy city of Saudi Arabia. Riyadh is the sort of financial, political capital of Saudi Arabia, but Mecca is the beating heart and soul. Mecca is the home of Islam, right? So when Mecca is attacked and destroyed, and possibly other cities as well in Saudi Arabia, right, 1 day, well, why not? It talks about burning, doesn't it? Verse 8, it says she'll be utterly burned with fire, right? Verse 9 talks about, see the smoke of her burning. Well, if that's literal, your guess is as good as mine, but potentially we're looking at missile attacks from other Islamic nations directed towards Mecca and then perhaps other cities in Saudi Arabia as they decide to just wipe it out, right, because it's evil as far as they're concerned. And why is God so upset? Well, I can't speak on behalf of God, but I imagine her influence worldwide has been so horrific. And of course, she's been active in pursuing saints and martyrs and anybody, even remotely called, Christian. I mean, I know you and I sometimes look at the Christian world and we sort of subdivide it. well, they're not really Christians because they keep Sundays, and they're not really Christians because they believe in the Trinity, and they're not really Christians because they believe Gerald Flurry, and they're not really Christians because they follow Dave Pack. And what we do is sort of subdivide and subdivide. That's fine for us. We're inside the Christian umbrella, and we pick and poke fingers at, and point fingers at, I should say, and ridicule others. Baptists, what do they know about God's truth, etc., etc. Catholics, blah, heretics, and so on. But to people on the outside, if you're an Islamic person, an Islamic nation, an Islamic leader, right, by and large, you don't look at all these little bits and pieces. As far as you're concerned, they're all Christians. All of them. It's Christianity, as far as you're concerned. You look at it, well, they all believe in God the Father, which is blasphemous if you're a Muslim. They all believe in Jesus Christ, the Son of God. That's blasphemous if you're a Muslim. They believe Jesus died. That's not what Muslims believe. They believe Jesus, Christians believe Jesus, went to the grave 3 days and 3 nights-ish, and rose from the dead and ascended to heaven and sent his messengers out to preach the gospel. Right? As far as other religions looking at Christians are concerned, we're all the same. We might disagree over bits and pieces, but as far as they're concerned, every one of those people are Christians. Every one of those people should be offered the opportunity to convert. And if they don't take it, all of those Christians should be put to death, sacrificed to Allah, right? That's how they see it. So you read here about, Christians or saints and so on being attacked by Islam. It's not necessarily just the Church of God of San Antonio, USA, that's being pictured in all 21 of them, right? Anyway, get back on track, Jamie. Bit more background about Mecca, right? Because if you're like me, you wouldn't know an awful lot about Mecca. I mean, occasionally I review it, and then occasionally I forget it. So here's some pictures and thoughts about Mecca, representing in some ways Islam, which in itself represents in some ways Saudi Arabia. I don't think you can easily just split them up. The way that Saudi Arabia became famous is because of Mecca. So Mecca is, like I said, boom, 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 the beating heart of Islam, at least Sunni Islam, and the beating heart of Saudi Arabia, and etc. Well, one thing I think I mentioned earlier is, Mecca is a city in a desert, unlike Rome and New York. I think we've got a picture of that, or actually I think it's several pictures. So a few pictures there. I think the bottom left is a map, and it's all sort of beigey coloured. That's because it's desert. Bottom right is a picture. Bottom right, top right, you can see lots of desert in the background surrounding. Bottom right is a picture of where they all go to worship at the Kaaba. It's a city literally in a desert. You can see the hills behind it. Top left is taken from, looks like, 4, 5, 6 miles away. It's a mountain which pilgrims climb up. I think the mountain is where Muhammad had his visions from the angel Gabriel when he received his revelation. And you can see the far distance across the desert is Mecca, right? So Mecca is a city very clearly in the desert. There's miles and miles from Mecca to anywhere, right? The population of Mecca is roughly 2 million in normal times. It's a reasonable sized city, all right, but it swells during the pilgrimage days often to about 4.5 million. It doubles in size and a bit. The last couple of years the Hajj has been cancelled because of COVID, that sort of stuff, the pandemic. But typically, yeah, it's a busy place when you get 2 to 3 million pilgrims arriving for the Hajj, right? And Mecca is the most expensive land on the earth, I believe. It's about $100,000. I guess how much land you get for $100,000 in Mecca? A square meter. So, roughly, square yard, if you like, imperial measures, $100,000 for a square yard. So how much would this room be? Is it about 10 feet by 80 feet? What's that?
No, it's
10
not.
square meters?
About 10.
About $1 million for the room I'm in at the moment, if it was in Mecca, right? The most expensive building in the world is where the people meet at the Kaaba and the buildings around it. It's called the Masjid al-Haram. I think Haram is the name of the square. And they estimate it cost $100 billion to build, right? Not $100 million, which is quite a lot of money. Not $500 million, which is a lot of money. Not $1 billion, which is like unearthly sums of money. $100 billion for one building. I think we've got a picture of that. It's actually a complex. So you've got there, I don't know if you can see the small black box towards the back of that. That's the Kaaba, the cube, right? And then there's people in there. And that square with the buildings that surround it, that's $100 billion, the most expensive building on planet Earth. And now, in terms of Mecca, you can't go there.
Not unless you convert.
Well, yeah, of course. If you convert, you can go there. Only Muslims are allowed in the holy city of Mecca, not riffraff like you and me. Right? Only Muslims, right?
Laura doesn't want to go because it's too busy.
Saudi Arabia, so we're sort of branching out a little bit from Mecca itself, but Saudi Arabia, which looks after and is custody of Mecca, has about 15,000 in the royal family. And my family is a bit smaller than 15,000, right? But 15,000 constitute the royal family of Saudi Arabia. And it's estimated that we talked earlier about, luxury, opulence, wealth of Mecca and Saudi Arabia. The royals in Saudi Arabia have a net assets of about $1.4 trillion. I've no idea what that means. I can't figure out 1.4 trillion. I mean, people like Joe Biden, Boris Johnson throw money around left, right, and centre, but even them throwing money around from magic money trees. 1.4 trillion is an awful lot of money for a royal family to have. They have, this is where I think other countries around Saudi Arabia aren't happy even today, because rather than being sort of noble Muslims, pure, self-disciplined, the Saudi royal family is somewhat notorious, right, for luxury, for opulence. Yeah, they fly into London in private aircraft. They have sometimes 8, 10 super expensive cars on the aeroplane. The wives head off to Harrods. They'll close Harrods down for a night and just let the wives, plural, shop with a sort of endless credit cards, and they'll spend $1 million, 10 million, 100 million in a night, right? But anyway, got a few pictures coming up. What we're looking at, or what we're referring to, are palaces. Dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of palaces. 100 million here, 50 million here, a cheap palace at 25 million over there. On it goes. Private jets galore. Gold-studded super yachts cruise around the world, lap of luxury. Diamond-encrusted sports cars, right? The extravagance, the opulence, many Muslims feel is actually obscene and a disgrace to Allah. I think we've got some photographs we can just pop up here. Right, so what have we got there? Top left, is that's I think a gold throne on an aeroplane. Middle one, toilet. That's a gold toilet, which we obviously all need. Think at the top right, there's a gold escalator for the king to come down steps out of his aeroplanes. Think in the cars at the bottom, gold cars, jewel-encrusted cars. I mean, you wouldn't just want an ordinary car, would you? It could be covered in gold and jewels to set you apart, right? So that's just an illustration of some of the wealth and opulence that's there. In terms of the influence of Mecca and Saudi Arabia, in other words, the wine of their fornication, whereby they seduce presidents and prime ministers and kings and CEOs, right? Get their influence out there. There's a few dot points I've got here. One is Saudi Arabia, the home of Mecca, is the largest funder of Islamic terrorism. Jihadis. The money they get, the biggest amount of money they get, comes from Saudi Arabia, including Al-Qaeda, ISIS, you might remember from 3 or 4 years ago, the Taliban, right? Saudi Arabia is the biggest buyer of military weaponry on the earth. Most of it comes from the USA, like billions and billions and billions of dollars. And the second biggest supplier of weaponry to Saudi Arabia is some little tin pot country called Great Britain, right? Obama offered Saudi Arabia $115 billion of military might. And of course, that translates into jobs and factories and manufacture and logistics and supplies and deliveries and lots of profit for those in the know and lots of profit for the lobbyists in Washington, hence the tentacles of greed, right, and so on and so forth. Saudi Arabia supports and supplies lots of what they call centers for Islamic studies, which they open up in universities across the Western world. So what they do is they supply money, I think typically $20 million grants to universities like Harvard, Georgetown, here in England, Cambridge University, and you build an annex on your university for Islamic studies. And then they supply money for the library. Then they supply students from Saudi Arabia and other Islamic countries, and they pay all their fees. So for most universities, ooh, oh, look at the money we're going to get. Wow. And what do the Islamic study centers do? Well, they seek converts to Islam.
They sell Islam as a religion.
Right.
Of course, yeah.
And they get about 25,000 converts a year in the US of A to Islam. Most of them actually formerly Christians. And of course, then they work hard to sell Islam to America and other countries. So when you get some atrocity, some Islamic jihadi, runs around with a machete and kills 2 or 3 people in a shopping center in America, Britain, wherever, instantly, all right, instantly, along come the people say, oh, no, that's nothing to do with Islam. Oh my word, no. They've all been trained at these Islamic study centers. They turn up and say, oh, no, that's an isolated example. That was a radicalized Muslim. That was a guy with mental health problems. Nothing to do with Islam, nothing to say here. Islam is a religion of peace, right? And they're trained at, supported by money from Saudi Arabia to basically lull the American, British people, Europeans into a completely false sense of security. What about buying US presidents? Is that influence? Is that wine and fornication? Well, President Jimmy Carter, the Peanuts man, allegedly received over $100 million from Saudi Arabia. I wonder what they got for that. The Bush family, senior and junior, would you believe received... More than that. They received about $1.5 billion to them and their companies. $1.5 billion. The Clinton Foundation, that's
that lovely Hillary and Bill.
Ahab and Jezebel, as somebody once called them, received over $100 million. Not all from Saudi, but I think about $40 million from Saudi. The other bits came from other Islamic countries. You can buy a lot of favors from US presidents, right? If you have that sort of money going into their coffers,
I missed about that.
right? You can buy cover-ups. I mean, for example, I think it's well known that in 9/11, of the 19 or so hijackers, give or take 1, I think, 15 were Saudi Arabians. Yet America attacked other countries, not Saudi Arabia. Well, let's not be too hasty here to judge Saudi Arabia, and on it goes. How many big corporations have got contracts, like military contracts with Saudi Arabia, where there's pots and pots of money, right? So if Mecca and or Saudi Arabia were to go down in flames, be no more, it would have a devastating impact on much of the Western world, especially bankers and finance companies, big corporations, right? Merchants and so on. It'd be the stuff of nightmares, because that's the heart and core of so much of the world's money, right? And yet, it's coming. And we'll cover that in more detail next week. Okay, so that will conclude today's Bible study.